My own son tried to kill me with a box of poisoned chocolates, and I, unknowingly, saved my life by making my daughter-in-law and grandchildren jealous. When he called me asking if I'd eaten the chocolates, I told him I hadn't, that I'd given them to Letitia and the kids. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Listen to the story to the end and tell me what you would do in my place. Then he screamed like a madman. You did what? At the time, I didn't understand why Tomas was so upset. I thought he was just mad because I had given his gift to other people. How naive I was. My name is Dolores. I'm 69 years old. For 40 years, I sacrificed everything for my son Tomas. Everything. My youth, my dreams, my savings. I adopted him when he was just 2 years old. After his biological parents died in an accident, I gave him my last name, my unconditional love, my entire life. But on that day, my 69th birthday, everything changed. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. That box of artisanal chocolates that arrived at my door seemed like a beautiful gift from a grateful son. The chocolates were exquisite, expensive. They came in an elegant box with a card that read, "To the best mother in the world. With love, Tomas." I was so touched. I hadn't received a loving gesture from him in months. Ever since he married Letitia, everything changed. She came into our lives like a storm, filling my son's head with venom against me. "Your mother is too nosy," she would say. "You're too old to have her taking care of you," she would whisper in his ear. And Tomas, my Tomas, the child I raised with so much love, began to change. Little by little, he started to pull away. Visits became scarcer, calls colder, hugs more distant. But I kept hoping. I kept believing that my son would go back to being the person he once was. That morning, when the chocolates arrived, I thought that it had finally happened, that my son had remembered how much he loved me, that Letitia had not managed to completely destroy the bond we had built over so many years. The chocolates looked delicious. They were from an exclusive brand, the kind that cost a fortune. Each piece was a work of art, decorated with golden details and perfect shapes. But I was always like this, always thinking of others before myself. These chocolates are too good for me alone, I thought. Letitia and the kids will enjoy them much more. The little ones had always been my weakness. Despite all the contempt their mother showed me, I adored those children. They were my grandchildren, an extension of my Tomas, the only pure thing left in that toxic relationship. So I took the box, carefully wrapped it again, and headed to Tomas's house. When I knocked on the door, it was Letitia who opened it. As always, she greeted me with that fake smile I hated so much. That smile that didn't reach her eyes, that screamed contempt, even as her lips tried to feign courtesy. "Hello, Dolores," she said in that condescending tone she used with me. "What brings you here?" I held out the box of chocolates to her and explained that they were from Tomas for me, but that I wanted to share them with her and the kids. For a moment, I saw something strange in her eyes, like surprise, but not the good kind. It was more like fear, confusion, but she quickly composed her expression and took the box. "What a nice gesture from Tomas," she mumbled. "The kids will be thrilled." She didn't invite me in. She never did. She always found an excuse to keep me at the door, as if I were a traveling salesperson and not the grandmother of her children. I truly wonder if you were in my place. What would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. That time, she said the children were sleeping, that it had been a very long day, and that maybe another day would be better. I went home with a slightly heavy heart, but also with a certain satisfaction. I had done a good deed. I had shared the joy of my son's gift with his family. That night, I went to bed thinking that maybe, just maybe, that gesture would help soften things between Letitia and me. The next day, the phone rang early. It was Tomas. His voice sounded strange, tense. "Mom," he said. "How are the chocolates?" The question took me by surprise. It was unusual for him to be so interested in knowing if I had enjoyed a gift. Normally, after giving me something, he seemed to forget all about it. "Oh, Tomas," I replied honestly. "I gave them to Letitia and the kids. You know how they love sweets." The silence that followed was terrifying. It was as if the world had stopped. I could hear my own heart pounding as I waited for his response. Then he exploded. "You did what?" He screamed with a fury I had never heard in his voice. "You gave them to Letitia and the kids? Are you insane?" His voice trembled in a way that frightened me. It wasn't just anger. It was pure panic. "Tomas, I don't understand," I said, trying to remain calm. "I thought you'd be happy that I shared your gift with your family." But he kept screaming more and more desperately. He kept asking me over and over if I was sure I hadn't eaten a single chocolate, if I had given the whole box, if the kids had already eaten them. His questions were so specific, so urgent, that I began to suspect. Why did he care so much that I hadn't tasted the chocolates? Why did he seem relieved that I hadn't eaten them, but desperate that I had given them to his own family? He hung up abruptly after yelling that I was stupid, that I had ruined everything. I was left with the phone in my hand, trembling, not understanding what had happened. But something inside me, a maternal instinct I had developed over years of care and protection, told me that something was terribly wrong. That afternoon, Letitia called me. Her voice sounded different, worried. "Dolores," she said, "the children felt sick after eating the chocolates. We had to take them to the hospital." My blood ran cold. "What happened to them?" I asked with my heart in my throat. "The doctors say it was food poisoning," she replied. "But it's strange. The chocolates smelled odd when we opened them, but the kids had already eaten several before we noticed." My world began to fall apart. The chocolates my son had sent me, the chocolates I had given away with so much love, had made my grandchildren sick. Tell me whether you have parents, grandparents, or older family members who deserve more respect than they currently receive from their families. Alternatively, tell me if you yourself are going through a situation in which you're not appreciated as much as you truly deserve. But there was something more. In Letitia's voice, I detected something that made me tremble. It was fear, yes, but also comprehension, as if she had finally understood something that had been happening right under her nose without her realizing it. I couldn't sleep that night. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in my mind with terrifying clarity. Tomas's reaction when he found out I had given the chocolates away, his desperation at learning I hadn't eaten them, his relief mixed with panic, the specific questions about whether I had tried even a small piece. And then, like a lightning bolt in the darkness, the truth hit me with all its brutal force. My son, my own son, whom I had raised and loved unconditionally, had tried to poison me. The following days were a nightmare. The children recovered, thank God, but the poison had left its mark. Letitia confessed to me that the doctors had found traces of arsenic in their little bodies. Arsenic, a word I had only heard in crime movies, was now part of my most horrible reality. For the first time in years, my daughter-in-law spoke to me without that mask of contempt. Her voice trembled as she told me, "Dolores, I don't think those chocolates were meant to be shared. I think they were specifically for you." Her words confirmed what my heart already knew, but my mind refused to accept. Tomas had disappeared. He wasn't answering the phone or responding to messages. When Letitia went to look for him at his work, they told her he had requested emergency leave. He had fled like the coward he was, leaving his wife and children to suffer the consequences of his devilish plan. But I knew my son. I knew where to find him. I knew that when he felt cornered, he always ran to the same place, his Aunt Nomi's house, my younger sister. She had always had a soft spot for Tomas, always justifying his mistakes, always protecting him from the consequences of his actions. I drove to Nomi's house with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. 40 years of unconditional love, 40 years of sacrifices, 40 years of giving everything I had. And this was what I got in return, a son who wanted me dead. When I knocked on the door, Nomi opened it with a look of guilt. "Dolores," she mumbled, "I didn't know you were coming." But I had already seen Tomas's car parked on the corner. "I know he's here," I said in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Tomas appeared behind her like a ghost. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but what struck me most was the expression on his face. There was no remorse, no guilt, just resentment, as if I were to blame for this whole mess. "Why?" was all I could ask him. "Why did you want to kill me?" My voice broke on that last word. Kill me. My own son had wanted to kill me. His answer shattered my soul into 1,000 pieces. "Because you're in the way," he said with a coldness that chilled my blood. "Because you've always been a burden. Because I need your inheritance and you're never going to die." My inheritance. Of course, it all came down to money. The money I had saved for decades working day and night. The money I had set aside while living like a pauper to secure his future. The money I planned to leave him when I died naturally, of old age, surrounded by the love of my family. "But I didn't know you had so much money," he continued in that venomous voice. "Until I saw the bank documents when you got sick last year. 2 million pesos, Mom. 2 million that I need now, not when you're 90. 2 million pesos that I had earned with blood, sweat, and tears. 2 million that represented 40 years of work, of self-denial. Besides," he added, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "you're old. What else are you going to do with your life? Why do you need so much money at your age?" His words were daggers in my heart. Every syllable was a deeper betrayal than the last. Nomi tried to intervene. "Tomas, don't talk like that," she mumbled, but he silenced her with a look. "Aunt, you know I'm right. She's already lived her life. I have a family to support, children to educate, a future ahead of me." "A future built on my corpse," I replied with a bitterness I didn't know I had inside me. "A future bought with my death." He looked at me with contempt, as if I were the crazy one, as if I were the villain in this twisted story. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "It was going to be quick. The chocolates had enough arsenic to make it look like a natural heart attack. No one would have suspected a thing. You would have died peacefully in your sleep, and I would have inherited what was going to be mine anyway." His words revealed the depth of his betrayal. It hadn't been an impulse, a moment of madness. It had been a calculated, meticulous, cold plan. He had researched the poison. He had bought the most expensive chocolates to disguise the taste. He had calculated the exact dose. My death had been planned with the same dedication I had put into planning his birthdays for so many years. "And what happened?" I asked him. "Why didn't your perfect plan work?" His face twisted into a sneer of frustration. "Because you're too stupid to eat chocolates your own son gives you," he spat at me. "Because you always have to be the martyr. You always have to give everything. You always have to be the selfless, saintly mother." The irony was suffocating. The very flaw he criticized in me, my tendency to give rather than receive, was what had saved my life. My instinct to share the gift with his children had destroyed his murderous plan. But the worst part, he continued with growing rage, is that now Letitia knows everything. The children were about to die because of you, because of your habit of giving away what doesn't belong to you. He was blaming me. After trying to murder me, he was blaming me for the poisoning of his own children. Letitia had appeared at the door during our conversation. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with tears. She had heard everything. The final confirmation that her husband had not only tried to kill his mother-in-law, but had been willing to sacrifice his own children in the process. "Tomas," she said in a broken voice, "how could you? How could you put our children in danger?" He turned to her with the same coldness he had shown me. "Because nothing was going to happen," he replied. "Because the poison was for her, not for you." "But you knew I always share everything with the kids," Letitia had yelled. "Did you know there was a chance they would eat those chocolates?" Tomas shrugged as if he were talking about the weather. "It was a calculated risk," he mumbled. "A calculated risk." The children I had helped raise, the children who filled my afternoons with joy when everything else had turned gray, had been a calculated risk for him in his plan to assassinate me. At that moment, I understood that the son I had raised, the child I had adopted and loved as if he had come from my own flesh, had died a long time ago. The man standing in front of me was a stranger, a dangerous stranger, who had been able to look me in the eye for years while planning my death. "It's over," I said with a calm that surprised me. "Everything between us is over." He laughed, a bitter and cruel laugh. "What are you going to do, Mom? Call the police? Turn in your own son? You know you'll never do that. You're too weak. Too weak." For 40 years, I had been too weak to say no to him, too weak to set boundaries, too weak to see that my unconditional love had turned him into a monster. But that day in that house, in the face of the evidence of his absolute betrayal, something changed inside me. "You're right," I told him. "I've been too weak for too long, but that ends today." I turned and started walking toward the door. Just wait and see what a weak woman can do when she finally finds her strength. His screams followed me out into the street. He yelled that I was ungrateful, that after everything he had done for me, I was abandoning him. Everything he had done for me. The height of cynicism. Trying to kill me was, in his twisted mind, something he had done for me. That night, alone in my house, I cried as I hadn't cried in decades. I cried for the son I had lost, for the wasted years, for the betrayed love. But most of all, I cried for the woman I had been, naive, permissive, blind to the evil that was growing right in front of my eyes. When my tears ran out, I made a decision. Tomas was right about one thing. I was too weak. But that weak woman was dying that night. Tomorrow, a new Dolores would be born, a Dolores who had learned that love without limits is not a virtue. It's complicity. A Dolores who had discovered that sometimes, to protect yourself, you have to become what your enemies least expect. My phone rang. It was my lawyer, Sergio, an old family friend. "Dolores," he said. "Leticia called me. She told me everything. Are you okay?" For the first time in days, I smiled. "I'm perfect, Sergio, and I have work for you." The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was total. Over the next few weeks, while Tomas believed he had emotionally destroyed me, I was building the foundation for my revenge. The first step was to move. I couldn't keep living in that house where I had raised a viper, where every corner reminded me of my naivete. Sergio helped me find an apartment in the most exclusive part of the city, a penthouse with a panoramic view that cost more in 1 month than Tomas earned in 3. When I signed the lease, I saw the surprise in the real estate agent's eyes. A 69-year-old woman, modestly dressed, paying cash for a luxury apartment. "It's for my retirement," I told her with a smile. I decided it was time to give myself some treats. Retirement. What a liberating word. I was retiring from being a mother. I was retiring from being a victim. I was retiring from being the woman who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. The apartment was spectacular. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen that looked like it was from a magazine. But what I liked most was the study, a quiet space where I could plan, where I could think, where I could become the strategist Tomas had never imagined I could be. Sergio was my first ally in this new life. For years, he had handled my basic legal affairs, wills, insurance, minor paperwork. But now I needed something more. I needed a legal warrior to help me systematically dismantle the life of the man who had tried to murder me. "Dolores," he said in our first serious meeting, "this is going to be brutal. Tomas won't give up easily. He'll fight, he'll lie, he'll try to manipulate the situation to his advantage." I leaned back in his leather office chair and looked him in the eye. "Sergio, he underestimated me for 40 years. Now it's my turn to surprise him." The first thing we did was secure my money. Tomas knew about the main account, but he didn't know about the other 3. He didn't know about the certificates of deposit that I had been renewing religiously every year. He didn't know about the stocks I had bought with extra money from my weekend jobs. He didn't know that his stupid mother had built a modest but solid financial empire. In total, Sergio told me after reviewing all the documents, we're talking about almost $4 million, not 2, as he thinks. $4 million. 40 years of sacrifice turned into economic power. 40 years of living like I was poor to die like a queen. But money was just a tool. The real weapon was information. Sergio hired a private investigator, a former police officer named Raul, who specialized in family cases. What we discovered in the following weeks left me speechless. Tomas hadn't just planned my death for the inheritance. He had debts I was unaware of, gambling debts, debts to loan sharks, debts that had made my death an urgent necessity for him. My son wasn't just a frustrated murderer. He was a bankrupt gambler who had bet his family's future on my back. "Here's the proof," Raul told me, handing me a folder full of photographs, documents, bank records. "Your son owes more than $500,000 to some very dangerous people, people who don't take excuses." The photographs showed him in casinos, in clandestine betting houses, in late-night meetings with menacing-looking men. He had mortgaged the house he lived in with Leticia without telling her. He had pawned his wife's car. He had emptied the children's savings accounts to pay interest. My son wasn't just a murderer. He was a thief who had stolen his own family's future. Letitia knows nothing about this, Raoul continued. He's been lying to her for months. He tells her he's having problems at work, that payments are late, that they need to economize. But the truth is, he's using the house money to gamble. The information was devastating, but it was also perfect. Tomas had built his own prison with his lies and addictions. I just had to push the bars for everything to collapse. Meanwhile, he believed he had beaten me. It had been 3 weeks since our confrontation at Noemi's house, and I hadn't given any sign of life. I hadn't called him, hadn't shown up at his house, hadn't made any drama. In his narcissistic mind, this confirmed his theory. I was too weak to face him. But I was working. Every day from my new apartment, I coordinated with Sergio on our next moves. Every night, I reviewed Raoul's reports. I learned more about the monster my son had become. Every morning, I planned the next step of my meticulous revenge. The first phase was psychological. I needed Tomas to feel that he was in control, that he had won. I needed him to be confident, to let his guard down. That's why I hadn't given any sign of life. That's why I had let him believe I was hiding somewhere, crying and feeling defeated. Sergio had explained the legal process to me. "We have evidence of the attempted poisoning," he said. "The children's medical analysis, Letitia's testimony, the recordings you made of his confessions." Yes, I had recorded our entire conversation at Noemi's house with a small device Raoul had given me, hidden in my purse. "But," Sergio continued, "a criminal case is going to be long and complicated. There will be media, public scandal. Are you prepared for that?" I was more than prepared. After 40 years in the shadows, I was ready to come into the light and show the world who Tomas really was. "Besides," he added with a smile, "we have the evidence of fraud, swindling, and financial manipulation. We can destroy him financially before the criminal process even begins." Financially. The words sounded delicious. Tomas had tried to kill me for money. Now he was going to lose all his money for trying to kill me. During those weeks of silence, I also worked on myself. I hired Yolanda, a personal stylist who completely transformed my image. Goodbye to old, conservative clothes. Goodbye to gray, unkempt hair. Goodbye to the hunched posture of a defeated woman. When Yolanda was done with me, I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. My hair was dyed an elegant brown, cut in a modern style that took 10 years off me. My clothes were sophisticated, but not ostentatious. Quality suits, designer shoes, discreet but expensive accessories. "Dolores," Yolanda said to me, admiring her work, "you look like a woman of power." A woman of power. I liked the sound of that. For 40 years, I had been a woman of service, a woman of sacrifice, a woman of shadows. Now it was time to be a woman of power. The last element of my transformation was the most important, my attitude. I hired a personal coach, a psychologist specializing in female empowerment. "Dolores," she said in our first session, "you have to stop seeing yourself as a victim. You are a survivor. You are a warrior." The sessions were revealing. For decades, I had confused love with submission, kindness with permissiveness, motherhood with total self-denial. I had raised a monster because I had been afraid of being a bad mother if I set boundaries. True love, the psychologist explained to me, includes consequences. If there are no consequences for bad actions, there is no love. There is complicity. Complicity. For 40 years, I had been an accomplice in my son's transformation into a sociopath, but no more. The new Dolores was no one's accomplice. The new Dolores was a force of nature that was about to unleash a devastating hurricane on Tomas's world. One night, exactly a month after our confrontation, I decided it was time to make my first public appearance. I carefully chose the location, the most exclusive art gallery in the city, where a private collection of contemporary paintings was being exhibited. I dressed in a black designer suit, high heels that made me look taller and more imposing, and jewelry I had bought that very afternoon. When I arrived at the gallery in a luxury taxi, the social photographers turned to look at me. They didn't recognize me, but they instinctively knew I was someone important. I walked through the gallery with a glass of champagne in my hand, admiring the works of art, chatting with collectors and critics. For the first time in decades, I felt in my element. Elegant, sophisticated, powerful. And then I saw him. Tomas was in the opposite corner of the gallery, accompanied by Letitia. She looked tense, uncomfortable, clearly out of place in that luxurious environment. He was trying to impress some businessmen, probably looking for new victims for his scams. Our eyes met across the room. I saw the shock on his face when he recognized me. The defeated woman he had left crying a month ago had been replaced by this sophisticated and mysterious version of his mother. I approached slowly, savoring every step. When I reached him, I smiled with a poisonous sweetness. "Hello, Tomas," I said in a voice that exuded power. "What a surprise to find you here." His face had turned pale. Letitia was looking at me with a mixture of admiration and confusion. The businessmen who were talking with Tomas turned toward me with curiosity. "Mom," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" His voice trembled slightly. For the first time in his life, my presence intimidated him. "I'm enjoying my retirement," I replied, taking a sip of champagne. I decided it was time to give myself some treats. The word retirement echoed in the air like a veiled threat. The businessmen looked at us with interest. It was obvious there was family tension, but it was also obvious that I was not the victim they had imagined. "Retirement?" one of them asked politely. "What are you retiring from, ma'am?" "From being too generous," I replied without taking my eyes off Tomas. "Sometimes when you give too much, people get used to receiving. There comes a point where you have to stop giving and start collecting." Collecting. The word hung in the air like a promise of a storm. Tomas knew exactly what it meant. He knew that his time of taking without giving had ended. He knew the hunt had begun, and that he was now the prey. The following days were filled with exquisite tension. Tomas knew something had changed, but he didn't know what. He had seen me at the gallery, transformed into a woman he didn't recognize, and that made him uneasy. He began to call me obsessively, but I didn't answer. I let his calls go to voicemail, where I could hear his growing nervousness. "Mom, answer the phone," he would say in his messages. "We need to talk. I need to know what you're planning." What was I planning? For the first time in his life, he was the one who was afraid of me. For the first time, I was the predator, and he was the prey. Sergio had begun the legal phase of my revenge. The first thing was to file a civil lawsuit for attempted murder with all the evidence we had compiled: the children's medical analysis, the audio recordings, the testimonies of Letitia and the medical staff who had treated my grandchildren. "Dolores," Sergio said in his office, "this lawsuit is going to be a scandal. The media will cover the case. Your story will be on all the news. Perfect. I want everyone to know who Tomas really is. I want his neighbors, his coworkers, his friends to know that he tried to assassinate his own mother. Additionally," he added with a smile, "we have evidence of fraud, swindling, and financial manipulation. We can destroy him financially before the criminal process even begins. Financially. The word sounded delicious. Tomas had tried to kill me for money. Now he was going to lose all his money for trying to kill me. During those weeks of silence, I also worked on myself. I hired a personal stylist who completely transformed my image. I also hired a personal coach, a psychologist specializing in female empowerment. Dolores, she said in our first session, you have to stop seeing yourself as a victim. You are a survivor. You are a warrior. The sessions were revealing. For decades, I had confused love with submission, kindness with permissiveness, motherhood with total self-denial. I had raised a monster because I had been afraid of being a bad mother if I set boundaries. True love, the psychologist explained to me, includes consequences. If there are no consequences for bad actions, there is no love. There is complicity. Complicity. For 40 years, I had been an accomplice in my son's transformation into a sociopath, but no more. The new Dolores was no one's accomplice. The new Dolores was a force of nature that was about to unleash a devastating hurricane on Tomas's world. One night, exactly a month after our confrontation, I decided it was time to make my first public appearance. I carefully chose the location, the most exclusive art gallery in the city. I dressed in a black designer suit, high heels that made me look taller and more imposing, and jewelry I had bought that very afternoon. When I arrived, the social photographers turned to look at me. They didn't recognize me, but they instinctively knew I was someone important. I walked through the gallery, admiring the works of art, chatting with collectors and critics. And then I saw him. Tomas was in the opposite corner of the gallery, accompanied by Leticia. Our eyes met. I saw the shock on his face when he recognized me. The defeated woman he had left crying a month ago had been replaced by this sophisticated and mysterious version of his mother. I approached slowly, savoring every step. When I reached him, I smiled with a poisonous sweetness. "Hello, Tomas," I said in a voice that exuded power. "What a surprise to find you here." His face had turned pale. "Mom," he stammered, "what are you doing here?" "I'm enjoying my retirement," I replied. I decided it was time to give myself some treats. The word retirement echoed in the air like a veiled threat. "Retirement?" one of the businessmen asked. "What are you retiring from, ma'am?" "From being too generous," I replied without taking my eyes off Tomas. "Sometimes when you give too much, people get used to receiving. There comes a point where you have to stop giving and start collecting." Collecting. The word hung in the air like a promise of a storm. Tomas knew exactly what it meant. He knew the hunt had begun and that he was now the prey. The following days were filled with exquisite tension. Tomas knew something had changed, but he didn't know what. He began to call me obsessively, but I didn't answer. I let his calls go to voicemail, where I could hear his growing nervousness. "Mom, answer the phone," he would say in his messages. "I need to know what you're planning." What was I planning? For the first time, he was the one who was afraid of me. For the first time, I was the predator, and he was the prey. Sergio had begun the legal phase of my revenge. The first thing was to file a civil lawsuit for attempted murder with all the evidence we had compiled, the children's medical analysis, the audio recordings, the testimonies of Leticia, and the medical staff. "Dolores," Sergio said, "this is going to be a scandal. Your story will be on all the news." Perfect. I want everyone to know who Tomas really is. Additionally, he added, we have evidence of fraud, swindling, and financial manipulation. We can destroy him financially before the criminal process even begins. Financially. The words sounded delicious. Tomas had tried to kill me for money. Now he was going to lose all his money for trying to kill me. I was ready. The public humiliation was satisfying, but the real justice was yet to come. The legal processes, the loss of his assets, the complete destruction of the life he had built on lies and betrayals. He had underestimated the woman who had raised him for 40 years. Now he was discovering that he had awakened a monster much more powerful and ruthless than himself. The hunt had officially begun, and I was a predator who had waited 40 years to show my claws. The legal process advanced like an unstoppable avalanche. Sergio had filed all the lawsuits simultaneously: attempted murder, family fraud, aggravated swindling, and a civil lawsuit for emotional damages amounting to $5 million. Tomas woke up one Monday and discovered that his life had exploded into 1,000 pieces. His bank account was immediately frozen. The few savings he had left after his compulsive gambling were blocked. While the origin of the funds was investigated, his salary was garnished to ensure payment of the civil lawsuits. From one day to the next, he was left with nothing. "Dolores," Sergio reported with satisfaction, "your son is broke. He can't afford a decent lawyer. He's going to have to settle for a public defender." A public defender against the best law firm in the city. The battle was uneven from the start, but the most delicious part was watching his social world crumble. The video of my television interview had generated such a scandal that the media began to investigate Tomas's life more deeply. His gambling debts, his scams against coworkers, and his systematic lies came to light. His boss called him to an urgent meeting. "Tomas," he said, "the company cannot afford to have its name associated with this scandal. You are fired, effective immediately." 20 years of working at the same company, eliminated by a scandal he had created himself. The loan sharks who had been pressuring him for his gambling debts saw the news and decided to accelerate their collections. They knew that if they didn't act quickly, they wouldn't get a penny back. They began to show up at his house, call him at all hours, and threaten him openly. One night, while I was enjoying a glass of wine in my luxury apartment, I received a call from Leticia. She was crying. "Dolores," she said between sobs, "men came to the house, armed men. They said that if Tomas doesn't pay them tomorrow, they're going to take the house and everything in it." "Where is Tomas?" I asked. "He disappeared," she replied. "When he saw those men, he fled out the back door. He left me alone with the children to face those criminals. A coward until the end. When things got difficult, he abandoned his family to save his own skin." "Leticia," I said firmly, "take the children and go to your mother's house tonight. Tomorrow morning, we're going to fix this." The time had come to show my next card. The next morning, I arrived at Tomas's house, accompanied by Sergio and 2 bodyguards I had hired. The loan sharks were there, inspecting the property, calculating what they could take to cover the debt. When they saw me arrive, they approached with curiosity. "Ma'am," the leader of the group, a burly man with scars on his hands, said to me, "Are you related to Tomas?" "I'm his mother," I replied, with the same calm I would use to talk about the weather. "And I've come to make a proposal." I took a pre-signed check from my purse. "This is the exact amount my son owes you," I said. $530,000. Take it and forget about him forever." The men looked at the check with surprise. They hadn't expected an elegant woman to show up with $500,000 in cash. "Why would you do this for him?" the leader asked me. I'm not doing it for him, I replied. I'm doing it for my daughter-in-law and my grandchildren. They're not to blame for living with a gambler. The man took the check, examined it carefully, and finally nodded. Deal. Your son is debt-free with us. When they left, Letitia came out of the house with tears in her eyes. Dolores, she said, I can't accept you paying Tomas's debts. I'm not paying them for him, I explained. I'm paying them for you, and it's not free. I handed her a document that Sergio had prepared. It's a property transfer. The house is now in your name. Tomas no longer has any legal right to it. And this, I said, giving her another paper, this is a loan agreement. You owe me $530,000, but you can pay it in small installments over the next 20 years. It was a perfect agreement. Letitia was protected. The children had a safe home, and Tomas lost his last economic resource. When he finally showed up, he would discover that he no longer owned anything. That afternoon, Tomas finally deigned to call me. His voice sounded desperate, broken. Mom, he begged, I need your help. The loan sharks are going to kill me if I don't pay them. I need money. I need you to forgive me. I need— Tomas, I interrupted him coldly. I already paid your debts. I could hear his sigh of relief on the other end of the line. Thank you, Mom. I knew you wouldn't abandon me. I knew. But I didn't do it for you, I continued. I did it for Letitia and the kids, and you no longer have a house. I transferred it to your wife's name. The silence that followed was absolute. What? He finally mumbled. The house is no longer yours. Your wife owes me the money. No, you have nothing to do with that property anymore. His breathing became agitated. You can't do that, he screamed. It's my house. I bought it. You bought it with money you stole, I replied, and now it has returned to its rightful hands. Letitia and the kids are protected. You're on your own. I hung up the phone without waiting for his response. The following days were filled with delicious tension. Tomas showed up at the house, but Letitia had already changed the locks. When he tried to force his way in, she called the police. The officers arrived and explained that he no longer had any legal right to the property. But she's my wife, he yelled, as they escorted him out of his own house. I have a right to be here. Sir, the officer said, your wife has requested a restraining order. You cannot approach within 200 meters of this property. A restraining order. Letitia had followed my advice to the letter. Now Tomas had not only lost his house, but he was legally forbidden from approaching his family. He was a complete pariah, rejected by society and abandoned by his own. Homeless, jobless, penniless, Tomas was forced to take refuge in cheap, seedy hotels. But even that became unsustainable when the media started following him. Reporters constantly harassed him, asking him about the attempted murder, his debts, his gambling addiction. One night, desperate and humiliated, he decided to do something he considered intelligent, but which turned out to be the final nail in the coffin of his destruction. He created a social media profile and began to live stream, trying to tell his side of the story. My mother is crazy, he said to his phone camera from a dirty hotel room. She's making all this up because she wants attention. I never tried to poison anyone. The chocolates were normal. She's manipulating my whole family against me. But the internet doesn't forgive. Users began to bombard him with specific questions he couldn't answer. Why was there arsenic in the chocolates? They asked. Why did your children get poisoned? They insisted. Where's the proof that your mother is lying? His stream went viral, but not in the way he expected. It went viral as an example of pathological narcissism, as a live confession of a man who couldn't accept responsibility for his actions. The comments were brutal, ruthless, without mercy. "This guy really thinks we're stupid," someone wrote. "His own wife is turning him in and he says it's all a lie," another added. "Typical psychopath, always blaming others," a third commented. But what really sealed his fate was when someone asked him directly, "If you're innocent, why don't you sue your mother for defamation?" Tomas was speechless. He couldn't sue me because he knew I had all the evidence. He couldn't deny the attempted poisoning because the evidence was irrefutable. His silence in the face of that question was interpreted by everyone as an admission of guilt. The stream ended abruptly when he began to receive live death threats. He had tried to manipulate public opinion and had achieved the exact opposite. The next day, clips of his stream were on all the news. Behavioral analysts dissected him as a case study of malignant narcissism. Psychologists explained on television how his inability to accept responsibility was typical of antisocial personalities. Tomas had accomplished something I could not have achieved even with the best public relations team. He had destroyed his own reputation so completely and publicly that there was no turning back. He had become the national villain, the symbol of filial ingratitude taken to the extreme. But for me, the most satisfying thing wasn't his public humiliation. It was the tranquility I saw in Letitia's eyes when I visited her, the security my grandchildren felt in their own home, the peace I had found by stepping away from the toxicity that had dominated my life for decades. Formal justice was still in process, but poetic justice had already been served. The son who had tried to kill me for money now didn't have a penny. The man who had despised my love now begged for my forgiveness. The manipulator had been exposed and rejected by everyone. I, the victim who had spent 40 years in silence, had finally found my voice. The months that followed were a complete transformation. While Tomas sank deeper into his own misery, I flourished as never before in my life. The luxury apartment had become my sanctuary, a place where, for the first time in decades, I could breathe without the weight of constant manipulation. "Dolores," Sergio told me during one of our weekly meetings, "the prosecutor is very interested in prosecuting Tomas for attempted murder. The evidence is overwhelming. The audio recordings, the medical testimonies, the confessions he himself had made, all formed a solid and irrefutable case. Also," Sergio continued with a smile, "his public defender is trying to negotiate a guilty plea. He knows he can't win this case." A guilty plea would mean that Tomas would have to publicly admit in front of a judge that he had tried to assassinate his own mother. But what truly filled me with satisfaction was seeing how Letitia had flourished after freeing herself from the toxicity of her marriage. Without the constant lies, without the financial stress, without the emotional manipulation, she had returned to being the strong woman I had glimpsed years ago. "Dolores," she told me during one of our weekly lunches, "for the first time in years, I feel free. The kids are happy, safe, they're sleeping peacefully for the first time in months." Seeing my grandchildren regain their innocence, seeing their sincere smiles, was worth more than any revenge I could plan. One afternoon, while enjoying a coffee on my apartment terrace, I received an unexpected call. It was Nomi, my sister. Her voice sounded ashamed, guilty. "Dolores," she said, "I need to talk to you. I need to ask for your forgiveness." I decided to receive her at my house. When she arrived, the difference between us was abysmal. I looked elegant, serene, empowered. She looked consumed by guilt and shame. "Dolores," she began with tears in her eyes, I knew Tomas had problems, but I never imagined he was capable of trying to kill you. Know me, I replied with a calm that surprised me. You always knew there was something wrong with him. You always justified him, always protected him from the consequences of his actions. She nodded, unable to deny the truth. I know I was an accomplice to his behavior. I know I failed you as a sister. What hurts me the most, she continued, is that when he came to me seeking refuge after trying to poison you, I took him into my house. I protected him knowing what he had done. Her tears were genuine. Her repentance seemed real, but the damage was already done. Know me, I said without cruelty but with firmness. For 40 years, you chose to protect a monster instead of protecting your sister. I can't just forget that because you now feel guilty. She left my house crying, but I felt at peace. I had set clear boundaries. I had spoken my truth without concessions. The criminal trial began 6 months after the attempted poisoning. The media covered every detail, every testimony, every piece of evidence presented. I testified with a serenity that impressed even the most experienced reporters. Mrs. Dolores, the prosecutor asked me in front of the cameras, how did you feel when you discovered that your son had planned your death? I felt free, I replied, looking directly at Tomas in the defendant's chair. Free from 40 years of manipulation, from 40 years of giving unconditional love to someone incapable of reciprocating it. Tomas looked gaunt, aged, destroyed. His public defender had done what he could, but the evidence was irrefutable. The testimonies of Letitia, of the doctors who treated the children, of the specialists who analyzed the chocolates, built a perfect case. When it was his turn to testify, Tomas tried one last manipulation. I loved my mother, he declared with fake tears. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I never meant to harm her. But his own recordings betrayed him. When the prosecutor played the audio where he confessed his plan, his version completely collapsed. The jury deliberated for barely 2 hours. Guilty of attempted first-degree murder, guilty of endangering the lives of minors, guilty of aggravated fraud. The sentence was 12 years in prison without the possibility of parole before serving 8. When I heard the verdict, I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace, justice, the legal confirmation of what I already knew, that I had been the victim of a calculated and premeditated assassination attempt by my own son. Tomas looked at me from the bench as they handcuffed him. His eyes no longer held the arrogance of before, only desperation and self-pity. "Mom!" he yelled. As they led him away, "You're still my mother! You can't abandon me like this!" But I remained motionless, serene, watching him walk away toward his inevitable destiny. The civil cases were resolved quickly after the criminal conviction. The lawsuit for emotional damages resulted in a compensation of $3 million, which, of course, Tomas couldn't pay from prison. But the symbolism was important. The legal system had officially recognized the harm he had caused me. Letitia got a divorce and full custody of the children. Tomas lost all his parental rights after being found guilty of endangering their lives. My grandchildren were finally legally protected from their father's toxic influence. One afternoon, while organizing my new legal documents, I found a letter I had written but never sent years ago. It was a letter of thanks to Tomas for being the best son in the world. I read it and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. How blind I had been, how naive, how completely disconnected from reality. I decided to write a new letter, but this time to myself. Dear Dolores, I wrote, for 40 years, you confused love with complicity. You confused kindness with permissiveness. You confused sacrifice with virtue. Today, I celebrate that you have finally learned the difference. On my 70th birthday, I organized a small celebration in my apartment. I invited Letitia and the children, Sergio and his wife, Yolanda, my stylist, and Raul, the investigator, people who had helped me rebuild my life, who had supported me in my transformation. When I blew out the candles on my cake, I made a silent wish that no woman would have to wait until she was 70 to find her strength, to set boundaries, to defend herself against those who abused her love. That night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on the journey I had taken from a silent victim to an empowered woman, from a self-sacrificing mother to a person who valued herself, from a woman who gave everything without receiving anything to a woman who had learned that self-love is not selfishness, it's survival. Tomas had wanted to kill me to steal my money, but he had achieved the exact opposite. He had awakened a woman I didn't know existed inside me, a strong, intelligent woman capable of fighting for what belonged to her. Formal justice had been served, but the real victory was personal. I had regained my dignity, my autonomy, my right to live without fear or manipulation. 2 years after the sentencing, my life had found a balance I never thought possible. The emotional wounds had healed, not with forgetting, but with wisdom. I had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, but integrating the pain into a new, stronger version of yourself. My daily routine was a testament to my newfound freedom. I woke up without the weight of the anxiety I had carried for decades. I had breakfast reading financial news because I had decided to learn to manage my investments personally. Sergio had introduced me to Oscar, an ethical financial consultant who taught me that money could be a tool for empowerment, not just survival. Dolores, Oscar told me during one of our sessions, you have enough capital to live comfortably for the rest of your life and leave a considerable inheritance. Inheritance. The word that had motivated the assassination attempt now had a completely different meaning for me. I had decided to create a trust for my grandchildren, administered by Letitia until they turned 25. I also established a foundation to help older women who were victims of family abuse. My traumatic experience had become a social purpose. The children visited my apartment every weekend. Seeing their faces light up when they arrived was the most powerful medicine for any residual sadness. Grandma Dolores, little Anna would say, why doesn't Dad live with us anymore? They were difficult questions that Letitia and I had learned to answer with age-appropriate honesty. Dad made decisions that hurt a lot of people, Letitia would explain. Sometimes, when someone hurts others, they have to go to a special place to learn to behave better. The children accepted these explanations with the natural resilience of childhood, but I knew that eventually they would need more details. One afternoon, while playing with my grandchildren in the park near my apartment, I saw an older woman sitting alone on a bench. She looked sad, lost, with that expression I knew all too well. I approached and started a conversation. I'm Yolanda, she said. Not the stylist Yolanda, but another woman who, by coincidence, had the same name. I live with my son and his wife, but I feel invisible. They treat me like I'm a burden. Her story resonated deeply with me. It was like seeing my past reflected in another person. I told her about my experience without dramatic details, but with the honesty of someone who had walked through the same darkness. Yolanda, I said, you don't have to accept being treated like a burden. You have rights, you have worth, you have options. That conversation became the seed of something bigger. I began to organize weekly meetings in my apartment for older women facing similar situations. We called it the Circle of Strength. Every Thursday afternoon, my living room was filled with stories of survival, mutual support, and women rediscovering themselves. Sergio helped me formalize the foundation, the Dolores Foundation, for the dignity of older women. It was finally named. Our first project was a temporary shelter for elderly women who were victims of family abuse. The second was a free legal assistance program. The media began to call me to talk about the issue of elder abuse. My story had resonated so much that I became, without seeking it, a voice for other silent victims. Family abuse doesn't always leave visible bruises, I would say in interviews. Sometimes the abuse is emotional, financial, psychological. One morning, exactly 3 years after the attempted poisoning, I received a letter from prison. It was from Tomas. My first impulse was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Mom," it began, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I have been reflecting on what I did." The letter continued with what seemed like genuine apologies, expressions of remorse, promises of change. But there was something in the tone that was familiar to me, the subtle manipulation, the attempt to elicit pity. "I have been attending psychological therapy," he wrote. "The psychologist says I have deep problems that come from my early abandonment, from the death of my biological parents." Even from prison, he continued to blame others for his decisions. He was still incapable of taking full responsibility. "Please, Mom," the letter ended, "give me a chance to repair the damage I caused. Agree to visit me. I need to see you. I need your forgiveness to be able to heal. I need. It had always been about what he needed, never about what I needed or deserved. I showed the letter to my psychologist, the doctor who had helped me during my healing process. "Dolores," she said after reading it, "what do you feel when you read this?" "I feel pity," I replied, "but not for him. I feel pity because after 3 years in prison, he still doesn't truly understand what he did." "Are you going to answer him?" she asked. "Are you going to visit him?" I reflected for days on that question. Part of me, the mother I had been for 40 years, felt an obligation to respond, but the new woman who had emerged from the ashes knew that my healing did not depend on forgiving the person who had tried to kill me. I finally decided to write a response, but not the one he expected. "Tomas," I wrote, "I received your letter. I am glad to know that you are reflecting on your actions. However, my healing process does not require me to see you or forgive you. I have learned that forgiveness is for the benefit of the one who forgives, not the one who requests it. I have built a full life without you," my letter continued, David. "I have found peace, purpose, and happiness. Your absence is not an empty space in my life. It is a space filled with tranquility. I hope you find your own redemption, but my path to healing no longer includes trying to save you from the consequences of your decisions." I signed the letter simply as Dolores, not Mom. That title had been revoked the day he decided to become my potential killer. I sent the letter and felt a deep sense of liberation. I had definitively closed the last chapter of that toxic relationship. Letitia had also rebuilt her life. She had begun studying psychology, inspired by our experience. "I want to help other families identify signs of manipulation before it's too late," she told me. Her transformation from a silent victim to an active advocate was inspiring. The children were growing up healthy and safe. They occasionally asked about their father, but without the anguish they had shown during the years of family toxicity. Emotional stability had replaced the constant chaos that had marked their early years. One afternoon, while reviewing the Foundation's reports, I realized something extraordinary. In 2 years, we had helped more than 200 older women escape abusive situations. Some had recovered properties stolen by manipulative children. Others had found the courage to report mistreatment. All had rediscovered their dignity. My personal story of survival had become a beacon of hope for other women. The assassination attempt that had sought to silence me forever had ended up amplifying my voice beyond what I had ever imagined. That night, as I contemplated the city from my terrace, I reflected on the perfect irony of my situation. Tomas had wanted to kill me to steal my inheritance, but he had managed to make me build a much more valuable legacy, a foundation that would endure beyond my death, helping generations of women find their strength. The woman I had been for 70 years had died symbolically on the day of the poisoned chocolates. The woman who had been born from those ashes was stronger, wiser, and more complete. I had learned that sometimes, to find the light, you have to go through the deepest darkness. My revenge had been complete, not through the destruction of Tomas, but through my own reconstruction. The best revenge had turned out to be living a full life, without fear, without guilt, without the shadow of manipulation darkening my days. 10 years had passed since the day that changed my destiny forever. Now, at 79 years old, I looked at my life with a deep satisfaction I never thought possible. The Dolores Foundation had grown into a recognized national institution, with shelters in 8 cities and a legal assistance program that had helped more than 2,000 women. My grandchildren, now teenagers, visited every weekend. Anna was 16 and had decided to study law, inspired by our family story. Grandma, she told me during one of our conversations, "I want to be like you. I want to defend people who can't defend themselves." Her younger brother, Carlos, 14, showed an extraordinary emotional maturity for his age. Letitia had become a nationally recognized psychologist, specializing in family trauma and elder abuse. Together, we had written a book titled It's Never Too Late: Finding Strength After 70, which had become a bestseller and was translated into several languages. One spring morning, while reviewing correspondence in my foundation office, I received a call that transported me to the past. It was the director of the prison where Tomas was serving his sentence. "Mrs. Dolores," he said in a grave voice, "I have to inform you that your son passed away last night." The news impacted me, but not in the way I had expected. I didn't feel maternal pain or devastating loss. I felt a strange mixture of sadness for what could have been and relief for the definitive closure of that chapter. "What happened?" I asked with professional calm. "It was a sudden heart attack," the director explained. "The doctors say he had developed severe heart problems, probably related to stress and depression. He died peacefully in his sleep." The irony was absolute. He had planned my death by heart attack with poisoned chocolates, and he had finally died of a real heart attack. "He left a letter addressed to you," the director continued. "He wishes for us to send it to you." After a moment of reflection, I agreed to receive it. I needed to know his last words, not out of nostalgia, but to completely close this cycle of my life. The letter arrived 2 days later. I opened it with steady hands, without trembling or anxiety. "Dear Mom," it began in shaky handwriting, "I am writing this knowing that I will probably die in this prison. For 10 years, I have reflected on what I did, on the monster I became. I understand now that there is no possible forgiveness for trying to assassinate the woman who gave me everything." The letter continued, "I do not seek your compassion or your absolution. I just want you to know that my last conscious thought was one of genuine remorse for having failed you so deeply. I have followed your work with the foundation from here. he wrote. The other inmates show me newspaper articles about your achievements. It fills me with a strange mixture of pride and shame. Pride, because you are extraordinary. Shame, because I almost destroyed someone so valuable. The letter ended with words that surprised me with their apparent sincerity. I die knowing that the world is a better place because you survived and prospered. I hope my death brings you the final peace you deserve. With love and eternal remorse, Tomas. After reading the letter, I put it away in my desk. I didn't feel the need to cry or to forgive posthumously. I simply felt that a very long and painful book had finally reached its last page. The funeral was a small, private ceremony. Letitia, the children, Sergio, and I attended. There were no emotional or nostalgic speeches. It was a sober goodbye to someone who had chosen the path of destruction and had paid the full consequences. Anna, with the wisdom of her 16 years, approached me after the service. "Grandma," she said, "are you sad?" "I am at peace," I replied. Sometimes the deepest sadness is for what never was, not for what was lost. That night, alone in my apartment, I wrote the final entry about Tomas in my journal. Today, I buried the son I adopted 47 years ago, but the son I truly loved died 10 years ago, the day he decided to become my killer. Today, I just buried the remains of that decision. The following months were of extraordinary productivity. Without the looming shadow of Tomas, without the possibility of future legal hearings or confrontations, I dedicated myself completely to expanding the Foundation's work. We established a university scholarship program for older women who wanted to resume their studies after escaping abusive situations. We also created a research center on elder abuse, directed by Letitia. Our studies began to influence national public policies for the protection of older people. My personal experience had become a catalyst for broad social changes. On my 80th birthday, we organized a benefit gala for the Foundation. The event brought together politicians, businessmen, academics, and most importantly, hundreds of women whose lives had been transformed by our programs. During my speech that night, I reflected on the central lesson of my experience. I have learned that kindness without limits is not a virtue, it is negligence toward oneself. I have learned that unconditional love must include self-love. I have learned that sometimes, to save yourself, you have to be willing to disappoint those who expect you to sacrifice infinitely. My story began as a tragedy, I continued. An assassination attempt by my own son, but it became a story of rebirth, of discovery, of purpose, because I chose not to remain in the role of a victim, but to transform my pain into power, to help others. When I finished my speech, the 2,000 people present stood in a 5-minute ovation. But what moved me the most were the tears in the eyes of Anna and Carlos, my grandchildren, who looked at me with an admiration that I had earned through example and resilience. That night, back at home, I sat on my terrace contemplating the city. 10 years ago, I had been a 70-year-old woman, vulnerable, manipulated, almost murdered. Now I was an 80-year-old woman, powerful, respected, with a legacy that would endure for generations. The most perfect revenge had turned out to be the construction of an extraordinary life. Tomas had wanted to eliminate me to steal my money, but he had managed to awaken my true potential. He had wanted to silence me forever, but he had amplified my voice and turned it into a chorus of empowered women. I wrote in my journal that night, "I do not regret adopting him. I only regret not having understood sooner that kindness should never be practiced at the cost of self-destruction. My son wanted to kill me, but instead of destroying me, He freed me to become who I always should have been. The story had ended, but the legacy was just beginning. Every woman who found her strength through our programs was a victory over the mentality that had created Tomas. Every boundary set, every firmly pronounced no, every act of self-love was a silent revolution against the culture that teaches women to give everything without receiving anything. It had taken me 70 years to find my power, but I had used every day of the last 10 to make sure that other women didn't have to wait so long. That was my true inheritance, not money, but wisdom, not property, but purpose, not revenge, but victory through transformation. The circle had closed perfectly, and I was at peace. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace, or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts, because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses, and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.